do as well. There are reasons why we exclude evidence. The NHL's reasoning is, at the time, was just for practicality, but there are other more important reasons that show up in courts of law. Sometimes it's because under certain circumstances, we exclude evidence because we consider that kind of evidence to be unreliable. It's like, even if we have somebody recorded saying something or doing something, there are certain things about it that we think are unsafe. Confessions, even recorded confessions that are obtained under torture or a lot of heavy pressure, are excluded because people will say anything to end the torture. And you guys have already seen instances of this. Here's one that I haven't talked to you about. This is a case where a man in China was spent 10 years in jail for murder, but then he had to be freed because the guy he was supposed to have murdered ended up being alive and showed up. What had happened was the guy who everybody thought was dead had actually run out of town because he thought he had killed the person who was convicted of murder. Right? Zhao Zuhai had a fight with his neighbor, and then he was charged when there was a headless, decomposed body that was found. Turns out the guy everyone thought he murdered had just run away because he thought he had murdered the first guy. Very complicated, but ultimately this guy was let out. The important fact that I want you to retain here, Mr. Zhao, the guy who spent 10 years in jail for murder, his conviction was based on a confession. Now, presumably, he didn't want to go to jail, so you can infer that there was some kind of pressure, maybe not torture or anything like that, but just psychological compulsion can be very strong in these circumstances, enough that you would admit to a murder that hadn't even happened. Here's another example. This guy, there was a woman who was thought to have been murdered. 31 years after everybody thought she was murdered, she showed up again. She was living in Dusseldorf in Germany. Everybody thought she had disappeared in 1984. She had disappeared when she was 24. And then what happened was this other guy who was convicted of murdering a teenager confessed to killing her. I think there's probably more to this case than the Chinese one, but whatever the case was, she eventually showed up, and was obviously that made his murder conviction not stand. So sometimes we run into situations where things that we feel like should be reliable aren't. You guys know the Central Park 5 case. All 5 of these young men had confessed to various degrees to being involved in the assault on the jogger in Central Park, and served various quantities of years. Corey Wise is the longest sentence. I think he served about 11 and a half years. It's a bit grainy here. But these guys were very young. They weren't very understanding of exactly what the consequences would be for the things that they admitted to. And again, when there's a substantial element of psychological or physical compulsion or torture, then confessions, which everybody expects should be reliable, are often not.